Hi everyone, and welcome to How to Write a Scientific Investigation for high school aged students. So a lot of the time, and it could happen every single time you write a prac report or a lab report, that you actually have no idea what you are doing. And you know what? That's okay. That is what the guidelines are for, that is what your rubric's for, and most importantly, that is what your teacher is for. That is why they are doing the job that they're doing so they can actually help you. So make sure you ask if in fact you have no idea what you are doing. So I'm going to start with the results section. And I'll go through this throughout a couple of times, but basically this is where you need to present your data. So whether that be a graph or a table or an image, whatever that may be, you can put a little sentence or two underneath the graph or table or figure, but keep it really brief because you're going to discuss the data in your discussion. You don't want to do it in the results section. So thirdly, anytime you do include an image or a table or a graph, make sure you number those. Table 1, and then pop a title in there or whatever it is that you're doing. So that way, when you refer to it in your discussion later, you can go straight back and you can determine which particular graph or table you are referring to. And lastly here, when you do display your graphs, make sure you label both axes appropriately. Okay, so what are you trying to show? That includes the units of measurement if that's what you are including. Now we need to recap how we present your results. So basically you need to show us what they are. What did you actually get or didn't get in some instances from your actual results? So you need to present that in this section here. Make sure the data is very clear. You should be able to understand what the data is showing us based on how clear your results table is. So is it logical? Is it clear and easy to be able to determine what is there? Is it self-explanatory? So can you show your data to somebody else and they can figure out what is happening based on how you presented your data? And basically, what's the main point? So what ties all of your results together? Is there a purpose? Is there something in common? Why do you have a few different graphs or tables? What ties that together? So in your discussion, this is where we need to really talk about your results in detail. So you need to show that you understand the experiment beyond the simple level of just completing it. So yes, it's great. You can do the prac if you can follow instructions, but do you actually understand what you are doing or why you are doing it? So you need to state that in your discussion, that this is the prac and this is why we're doing it. This is why it's so important. If you don't know, if you're thinking, well, I don't know, my teacher told me to do it, I don't really know why, go back and have a look at the title. The title will tell you, the title of the prac itself will tell you what the actual prac is about. So you should be able to then go and research information based on that. Analyze your results and then interpret your results. So you need to tell the reader what those results are meant to be showing us. Can you see any patterns or trends? So anything that's similar, okay, in your results. So can you see something similar within the one graph, between a few graphs, or between different groups? So what can you see as far as patterns and trends in your data go? The next little bit here, there's quite a bit on this page, so we'll just discuss it quite slowly. So we're looking at the discussion section. Now, not all of these need to be included to your particular investigation. It just depends what you're doing. So you can pick and choose which bits of these dot points will be relevant for each of the pracs you do. It could be different every single time. So you want to start the discussion by restating the purpose and the key information about your method. So what was so important and why did you choose the method you chose to do this particular experiment? So you make a general statement at the start. So you just indicate, did the experiment reach the predicted outcome? So what have you put in your aim and hypothesis? Did your experiment meet that? Use your data next. So that's when you go back to your graphs and tables and discuss here any relationship between these trends. So when things happen together, is there a cause and effect? So if something causes this, what is the effect of that? And then refer to any specific examples from your results that support these conclusions. Then you need to go and compare your results and your conclusions of your results with similar research conducted by other scientists. So that's when you need to go and find your peer-reviewed literature and add that research in there. So how are your results similar or different to results that were reported by other scientists when they did their research? So you go and look it up and have a look at what they wrote and see if yours is similar or if it's completely different. So you need to include that relevant information from reference books, literature, so peer-reviewed literature, and any other reputable source. And when you do that, you use that research to be able to justify and support your explanations of why those trends and patterns were there in your results. And then what you need to do next is identify any errors or inconsistencies in your results. Can you see something when you've graphed it that doesn't really fit in with the rest of your results? Is there something inconsistent there? And then have a think about what may have caused the results to be inaccurate. So you can write a paragraph on that section. So identify, explain any sort of sources of error and how they might have affected your results. Then think of ways to improve your experiment for next time. So not every time a prac is going to run perfectly. There's going to be things that go wrong. You need to be able to determine what that might be and how that could be improved next time. So maybe you could have done it another way. Maybe you could use other environmental conditions. How, if you were to change the procedure, would you get different results? And then you want to include a brief paragraph that discusses how the results from this prac relate to everyday or real world situations. Okay, so that means you need to go and find how the prac you're doing will be beneficial to society or the real world. So again, if you're not sure, you go and look at the title of the prac task. Read the title and go, oh, okay, so obviously it's on this. This must have some link to the real world. So you need to find out what that is so that you can see there's a purpose to doing that particular prac. So the example you're given here, if you're examining bacterial growth, you could then extend your discussion to the issue of sanitation in hospitals or meat factories. So you're showing how you can use your information and apply that information to the real world. So just to recap here, this is important. In the discussion, don't just restate your results. I mean, you can do that, but your marks will reflect that. So make sure the more marks you want, the more detail we put in, relevant detail. So you interpret that data. Don't just put a bunch of data in your discussion, interpret it. So what trends did you see, as mentioned before? And then what are the implications of your results? Did they meet your aim, your hypothesis? Errors, what were present in the results? And then structure it so your discussion is logical. Sentences and paragraphs flow from one topic to the next. Very important part of a prac write-up with your results is looking at whether or not your results are reliable and valid. So to discuss whether your results are reliable, have a think about, have you done or have you been able to test with repetition, whether that be by you actually repeating the tests in class so you can see whether or not it's consistent or not, or if you look at other information from reputable sources, do they seem to correlate with the data that you had? So you can then state, if that's the case in your discussion, that yes, these were reliable, these results were reliable. As far as validity, so you want to look at your actual experiment. So did that procedure or your design actually test your hypothesis? Have you identified all the variables and controlled variables? And do the findings relate to the initial hypothesis or problem that you put forward? If they do, you can state that the test is valid. If they don't, it might affect the validity of that particular practice. So just again, recapping our results. So we analyse those. How do we do that? Glad you asked. I'll tell you. So in the discussion, try and pop the following in, or double check. This should be like a checklist. You go back and make sure you've done this. What do your results indicate clearly? What are the sources of error? How do your results compare to your hypothesis? Mention and explain any noticeable trends or patterns, whether it be good or bad, within the results you have presented. Then we need to interpret it, and this interpretation is what goes in your discussion. So you should include the following information. So the significance of your results. You may not have results that worked in your prac, but in context of the real world, and if you were to do it correctly next time, they could be very significant. And then how do you justify the interpretation you have made regarding your results? You might have a different interpretation of those results than another group member, so make sure you justify your own interpretation of those results. And then look at limitations. So what may have affected the outcome of your results? Maybe you were given someone else's data that you didn't actually collect yourself. That could be a limitation in itself. Maybe you went into lockdown halfway through a global pandemic and weren't able to complete your prac task. That is a limitation. Okay, so a few different things could have affected the outcome of your results. But how could you improve that next time or for future research? Then we have your conclusion. It needs to be quite short. Okay, so a paragraph maybe. That's it. So state what you know as a result of your investigation. Do not bring up any new information in your conclusion. So we've got a bit of an example here in the next two slides. So when you write your conclusion, you need to summarize any key results and interpretations of the experiment. So it needs to be concise, so clear, brief, and don't introduce anything new. You need to reinstate the purpose of your experiment. So what was the question you were seeking to answer? And was your hypothesis supported or not? Then you need to identify the main findings, so the answer to your research question or hypothesis, and the main limitations that are relevant to interpreting your results. Again, here we go with an example here. So this is an example of an effective conclusion. So you could then substitute the words that are included here to your own wording based on whatever prac that you did. So we can start off with stating if your hypothesis was supported or not. And how do you word that? You might say the results supported the hypothesis by blah, 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 whatever it is. Then summarize your data. So we've got the example here. With the data, they found, the researchers, that the salt concentration had a negative effect on seed germination of radishes. Okay, so that's you summarizing what the data found. And then your limitations. So you might pop in there, results from this investigation were found to be unreliable due to, and then why that was. So here's an example. You can read through this bit yourselves. So we're looking at, this one's for temperature and pressure for ideal gas. So have a quick read of this and you can reword it for your own prac. Finally, this is another ticker box. You should go back and double check this. So here, nice big summary, make it easy for the marker to give you marks. So make sure that your aim is not buried in text. It needs to be nice and clear. So your writing, use scientific terminology, scientific writing, make sure it's clear, concise and objective. Okay, don't be vague or don't leave explanations out. If you need to use subheadings in your overall prac, you can. So you might put aim, one for your aim, one for your hypothesis, one for your method, up to you. Try not to just put a whole bunch of direct quotes in there as well, and avoid using contracted words like won't. You might say, I won't do this again. You can change that to next time the procedure will da, 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 da. Avoid using emotive language like, oh, it was beautifully done. And avoid use of personal pronouns, that's using I and we. And make sure you use past tense and that you are consistent with that. So here's some examples again for scientific writing that could help you. So if you're beginning a new sentence that has numbers, write the number in words. So for example, 18 mice were used in this experiment, not the number 18. Next one, use italics and correct scientific names. So if you can, and make sure if you do that, they are in italics. Okay, so if you're using the common sort of name, they don't need to be in italics, only if you use the scientific terminology. If you're using acronyms throughout, that is okay, but make sure the first time you use that acronym, you introduce it. So if you're talking about the World Health Organization and you want to use the acronym of WHO throughout, then you need to state World Health Organization the first time and then in brackets WHO, and then you can just use the acronym. And be consistent with those two. Don't just change them up halfway through. Check your sentence structure. So have you explained your sentences clearly? And does each section flow logically from one paragraph to another ticker box here at the end? So use correct paragraph structure and one topic per paragraph. So it's like a mini subheading. So clearly introduce your topic. Then in the body of sentences, provide evidence and explain. And then your concluding sentence should conclude the topics and links to the next paragraph. Give yourself plenty of time to prepare the prac report, and if you need to, make sure you go back and fix anything that needs to be done. You can show it to somebody else to see if they can understand it. And if they can understand it, then you know you've done a good job. And if you've done all that, it's finally over. The paper will be finished. On these following slides, these are some example discussions that you can use to help you with your discussion writing. So obviously this is from a peer-reviewed paper. They use scientific terminology in here. They've in-text reference. They've explained anything, any new concepts or any concepts at all. So if you are struggling to word your discussion, use the way these are worded. Use these as your examples. Okay, so there's a couple more here and you can have a look through that yourselves.